I had a flood in my bathroom, came from the flat above. And the first thing that the guy when he came to do the quote, the first thing the plumber said is, insurance job this, sir, is it? And of course, how much he quoted for was dependent on my answer. So an insurance system isn't necessarily a perfect one. There are ways of making it also more responsive and keeping the costs down. But just because there are imperfections in your system doesn't mean that you should junk it and replace it with a demonstrably inferior system. And if your system is as bad as its detractors keep claiming, why is the whole world queuing up to try and get in and use it? That's the ultimate proof. When is the next British election going to be? It has to take place within the next 9 months. There is now a race between those who are trying to push through the latest power grab by the European Union before the British general election, and those who are trying to postpone it until after the British general election, because the thing that David Cameron is going to do on his first day is to have a referendum on whether we want this new European constitution. And of course, there will be a 80-something% no vote, unless I've completely misunderstood my countrymen over the whole of my life. That the result is a foregone conclusion. And so all over Europe, people are desperately trying to defer the British general election and bring forward ratification of the European Constitution, whereas I and my Eurosceptic allies are trying to do the reverse. We're trying to bring forward the date of the British general election before the Constitution comes in. We're, of course, also trying to bring forward the date of the British general election because even while I've been talking to you, we're about another sort of $20 million in debt. So the quicker it happens, the better. We can't afford to carry on. Seriously, the most unforgivable thing is that our government is continuing to increase public spending this year, continuing to increase it, not fail to reduce it by enough. What are the gentleman whose grandfather was a doctor? You don't want to be in that situation. The alternatives are all bad once you end up in a British NHS type system. That is not to say that everyone is going to have a bad experience, right? Just to anticipate the health secretary telling me that I'm insulting my hardworking doctors and nurses, a bad system can contain good people. You will find plenty of British people who will come out and say everyone was friendly, the nurses couldn't have been nicer. Yes, of course. Although a state-run system tends to demoralize its staff and tends to impoverish them as well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they stop being polite and they stop being caring and they stop trying to do their best, of course, because they're human beings and they have chosen the medical profession generally in the first place out of a desire to help their fellow creatures. Right? But the system fails to produce the kind of results that you would take for granted here. And if you could be plucked back to the place of your grandfather's birth and made to wait in an accident and emergency ward in Birmingham today, and you could see the queues, the fending off of people, the lack of interest in what you as a patient want, I think you would be pretty shocked. You don't want to be where we are. Finally, how can the Conservatives mobilise Tea Party style? Your political system in the US has a number of unique and attractive characteristics that you may have become blasé about because it's human nature to take for granted that which is familiar to us. But very few countries have the emphasis that the US does on democracy, on the direct election of public officials. It is very unusual to have elected sheriffs and elected school boards and elected sanitation people and all the rest of it. It is incredibly unusual to have open primaries, which, again, this may seem like a kind of obvious thing, but almost no other country in the world allows the general public to have a say in who the parties should pick as their candidates, which means that almost every other country in the world has most of the seats in the legislature reserved because they're owned by one party or another, and therefore effectively no one in those seats has a meaningful vote. And all of those things have created a political climate here where people expect to be able to effect change through the ballot box. That may seem such an obvious, banal thing for me to say, but believe me, it is not how people feel elsewhere. The most common complaint I get on the doorstep, any politician in Britain will tell you the same thing, whatever party he's from, is It doesn't make any difference how I vote. Nothing's going to change. And that's right. They're not being cynical. They are accurately appraising the condition of British democracy in the 21st century, because the decisions that most tangibly impact on them are not in the hands of their elected councillor or their elected MP or their member of the European Parliament, but are rather in the hands of the Child Support Agency, the Financial Services Authority, the Health and Safety Executive, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, the Commission for Racial Equality, and 1,000 other quangos, agencies and executives stretching up to the European Commission. So our democracy has been diminished, and that's why we don't turn people out regular folk style for demonstrations, because people have become sullen and fatalistic and cynical. But let me end Reagan style on a positive note. Let me try and imbue the proceedings with a little bit of warmth. The Conservative leadership has gone further in the direction of embracing, let's call it a Jeffersonian model of politics, a US dispersed democratic style, than I ever imagined possible. About 8 months ago, I co-wrote a book called The Plan. And it's the same title as Rahm Emanuel's book, but mine has massively outsold his. If you Google The Plan, you get mine, not his. And in it, I proposed a series of political changes that would approximate some of the advantages that you have in the US. Local sales tax, elected sheriffs, open primaries, a whole bunch of these things. And some critics said, you're Americanizing our system. And I said, no, I'm repatriating our revolution. Where did all these guys get their ideas from? They came from Britain. It's just we've forgotten them, and now it's time for us to bring them back. Well, within the last few weeks, one by one, eerily, all of these policies are now becoming official Conservative manifesto pledges, including open primaries. And in fact, 6 hours ago, the United Kingdom held its first fully open primary in a safe Conservative seat in Devon. Every one of the 69,000 registered voters was circulated with a ballot paper, and 25% of them participated, which is fantastic, because I was a bit worried that, okay, we're not really used to this, we haven't got the hang of it yet, it's going to be a bit embarrassing if it's a low turnout, beyond what I dreamed. So there is the prospect of a new Conservative government, which instead of getting into power and snatching at the levers of state control, will try and push powers downwards and outwards to local councils, or better yet, to individual citizens. And that would be, if you like, bringing back the Jeffersonian dream of what he took for granted as his rights as a freeborn Englishman. That would be bringing back to our shores the ideals that inspired your patriot leaders. It's like, Michael would have heard me say this in Alec last month, it's like those grapes, those varieties of grape that were exported to California, and then they survived, and they were the only vines that survived when phylloxera wiped out all of the ancestral ones in Europe. In the same way, we have transplanted our ideals of British freedoms, and they have survived here better than they have in the United Kingdom. And above all, we exported the ideal that the only people who should pass laws are people that you vote for, and that if you don't like what they've done, you can sack them and replace them with somebody else. And that was my country's greatest gift to mankind. That was our best ever export. And it's taken root here, and it's flourished, and you can see it sprouting with great fertility and fecundity. But back in the United Kingdom, it's withered away. And if we get a Conservative government, and the only thing they do is to move towards an open source politics where people once again think that they can affect outcomes through their votes and nothing else, if that's Americanization, I'm happy to call it that, but that will mean that once again we have government answerable to the people. And whatever else happens, that will have been a great achievement. So I'm looking forward. We're going to have a Conservative government within the next 8 months. There is almost no scenario now where we don't win. And the whole issue for us is make the party keep its promises. Screw it, and I share this advice to any Republican, say, screw it to such a position in opposition that it's easier for them to keep their promises than to break them. Right? Structure the incentives in such a way that they can't backtrack. And with that, my friends, let me close by thanking our sponsors very warmly. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. I've really enjoyed it, and it's through your generosity that I've been able to. And a particular thanks to my friend Laurie, who has taken weeks out of her life to organise tonight and the rest of my programme. And if you haven't yet gone on to Regular Folks United, please do.